Morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on extending the life of existing buildings. My name is Gil Yaron. I'm the Managing Director of Strategic Initiatives and Circular Innovation with Lighthouse, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator today. Lighthouse is an organization dedicated to advancing circular economic concepts and practices in the built environment, and I'm going to explain what that means in a second. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that our presenters today are broadcasting from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, made up of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Îethka, Nakota, and Muchestabe First Nations, comprised of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The City of Historic Northwest Métis and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. We also acknowledge all Indigenous urban Calgary is also homeland to the Indigenous Calgarians who have made Calgary their home. Today's session is being put on in partnership between the City of Calgary and Lighthouse, and I'd like to thank the City of Calgary and the staff from the Climate Planning and Policy Department for their support in putting this together. We're recording today's session, and I think that is happening now. To protect privacy, attendees will not be able to share audio or video during the session. Rather, please interact with us via the Q&A function, which you should see either at the bottom or the right side of your screen. It would be great to know who's attending this webinar, so if you can take a moment now and just introduce yourself in the Q&A section, maybe just your name and your organization, that would be wonderful. This recording will be posted on Calgary's website at calgary.ca. So last month, the city, in partnership with Lighthouse, presented a webinar that introduced the concept of the circular economy and what's happening in Calgary to advance circular practices. We had a great session, and just to provide a brief recap about the circular economy, because it really frames this discussion. This diagram illustrates the stages in our current linear economy, where we take resources, we make things, use them, and then dispose of them as waste. Historically, we've tended to apply this linear model to the life cycle of homes as well. We build them, we occupy them, and when we no longer need them, we demolish them and dispose them as waste in our landfill. So this is a linear process. In a circular economy, we stop waste being produced in the first place. The circular economy system diagram, which is shown here, it's also referred to as a butterfly diagram, was developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it illustrates the continuous flow of materials in a circular economy. There are two main cycles. So on the left side, you'll see the biological cycle, and on the right side is the technical cycle. In the biological cycle, the nutrients from biodegradable materials are returned to the earth to regenerate nature. So waste is a resource in that case. Nature doesn't have a concept of waste. Everything is reused and then reintegrated into the ecosystem. The technical cycle on the right side mimics the biological cycle. So in the technical cycle, products and materials are kept in circulation through processes such as reuse, repair, remanufacturing, and recycling. The use of virgin materials is minimized, as is the waste. Any waste in the system is actually a design flaw because, again, waste is viewed as a resource. The circular approach looks at the life cycle of homes to see how we can reduce the amount of materials used in building homes, extending the life of homes, and reusing building materials once a home has reached the end of its useful life. Another way of comparing the linear and the circular economy is through inverted pyramids. In a linear economy, which is on the left side again, the greatest amount of material ends up as waste, which you see at the bottom of the pyramid, with progressively less material finding higher end uses as you go up the pyramid. In this context of buildings, it translates into demolishing and landfilling building materials as waste. In the circular economy, the triangle is inverted. In the context of buildings, the majority of the building materials are preserved in their original form through reuse of the entire building or deconstructed and reused. The materials are then used in their original form. So applying circular principles, the act of using circular principles, the act of preserving and relocating homes is the highest end use of buildings and the most beneficial outcome in the circular economy. This session is the first of a three-part series that's going to look deeper into the circular economy and circular building practices, starting with house relocation as a way of extending the life of existing buildings. So, in the city of Calgary, there are 535 homes demolished each year on average, creating hundreds of tons of waste. We don't have numbers for Calgary, but nearly 1/4 or 25% of all landfill in Canada comes from construction, renovation, and demolition waste. I'm going to refer to that as CRD waste going forward. The graph shows here, sorry, I went backwards. Oops, there you go. The graph shows the percentage breakdown of CRD materials found in waste audits conducted by the City of Calgary in 2019 at 2 landfills. This breakdown is similar to what you see in urban landfills across Canada. So the majority of the material is either treated or clean wood, and then followed by drywall, and then concrete and aggregates make up the largest portions of the CRD waste stream. Last month, my organization Lighthouse released a report called A Blueprint for Change that called on governments and the construction sector to move away from the linear model to a more circular model. One of the key recommendations coming out of the report is to set policy that requires all homes that are removed to be subject to an assessment. And through that assessment, that would look at a variety of factors, we determine if a home is suitable for being relocated, and if not relocated, then deconstructed to salvage and reuse valuable building materials. Demolition under this new model would be the last resort, not the first. Keep going backwards. So as I mentioned, today we're focusing on house moving and relocation as a way of extending the life of existing buildings. The second webinar in our 3-part series scheduled for September will discuss deconstruction as an alternative to demolition. And then our third session in October is going to explore the concept of embodied carbon and how it is being used to reshape how we look at our built environment. Calgary and communities across Alberta and Canada are facing a number of major challenges. First, a crisis of affordable housing. In addition, we are one of the most wasteful countries in the world. As I mentioned, CRD waste makes up about 1/4 of our waste that we generate. And the most existential challenge that we face is around climate change. Building homes generates huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, which we refer to as embodied carbon. And when a house is demolished, all that carbon associated with the creation of that home is lost. House relocation provides a triple win. It can be a source of affordable housing, it can reduce waste going to landfill, and it can capture or retain all of that carbon. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce to you our panel for today. We have 3 very experienced people in this sector joining us today, and I'm really pleased to have them all with us. Dave Tidmarsh, president of William Blake Homes, Custom Homes, developer of custom homes and a company that's supporting the relocation of existing homes on properties that they've redeveloped. As well, Pat McCain, president of McCain's Building Movers, whose family has been moving homes in the Calgary area for decades. And finally, Glenn Lewis, founder and president of Renewable Home Development, a company that is developing an ambitious model for scaling the relocation of homes in British Columbia. So welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you again for joining us. For this session, we've prepared a bunch of questions to pose to our panel, and we're going to take about 25 minutes to do that. And then after that, we'll open things up to questions from people who are on the webinar with us today. Again, just to remind you, to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on your screen, type the question there. And if you can, please indicate who you're addressing the question to. That'll just help us direct things. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the session, but we may not get to all of them. We'll see how much time we have. So let's get to it. I will start off with some questions to Pat. Pat, I've got a video here which I'm going to run while we're chatting. But I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us a bit about the process of moving a house and how long it takes, and maybe talk a bit about this move you see here.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
So this one is kind of a 1 in 100 houses. They're not all this big and not all this complicated. This house move from the very beginning to when it's put on the basement, put all back together, is probably 2 to 3 weeks. What the weather kind of delayed us here a little bit, but it ended up being a 2,800 square foot house that we had to take the top portion off due to height restrictions. Had to cut the 3-car garage off the back and transport that separately. But I would say in the city of Calgary, a typical bungalow from start to finish, from when we show up to when it's relocated onto another basement out in the country, you're probably 5 days, give or take, Gil, depending on the size.
Right. And can you just walk us through the kind of the basic kind of stages in moving a house?
Yeah, well, we just kind of old school. Just first of all, when me or my brother, the owners, we have to take a look at the house to see if it's structurally sound. There's no engineers involved. We're kind of our own engineers to see what can and can't be moved. Then we have to measure the streets to see if the house can fit out. And then we give pricing. If it's accepted, then we just get in there and start to jackhammer and start putting steel beams in and hydraulic jacks and just try to get her off the property, the basement in the city, and just get her down the street kind of thing. The demo permit part is really kind of taking a little bit of a turn here lately. The asbestos thing is really coming into play in the city of Calgary. The basements have to be remediated prior to us showing up, and then we start demolishing the basement, start putting beams in. And that's kind of really about the long and short, I guess, Bill.
No, that's great. And can you tell me, like, roughly what you think, how many homes are being moved out of Calgary in a year, roughly? I mean, we talked about the 500 plus homes that are getting demolished. I'm just curious to know if you have an idea about how many homes are being moved.
The numbers are going down.
Yep.
Yeah, numbers are going down, guys, due to some other issues that we're having. And we'll talk briefly a little bit about that later. But we used to move about 200 houses out of the city about 6 years ago. Now they're down to about 150 houses. I can't speak for any other movers in Calgary, but we're the only house movers in Calgary. There's a couple from out of town, but we did 52 buildings in Calgary last year. And that's houses and other kind of structures. 2018, that number was 4 times.
And how many homes, do you have a sense of how many homes that are being demolished now could be moved? Like, given all the logistical challenges and the quality of the homes, do you have a sense of how many we could be saving? Like a percentage, a rough percentage?
It's hard to say, you know what I mean? There's a lack of education out there that people don't know houses can be moved. People, they don't know that houses can be recycled. So we're trying to educate, I'm trying to educate those people, but that has a lot to do with independent buyers and the big developers like Dave. We have to educate people, say, hey, we can pick this house up and it's good for low affordable housing. I personally seen this in the last 2 years, probably about 100 houses that have been demolished that could have been moved.
Right. Okay, well, that's why we're here. And that's a perfect segue to Dave. Dave, from a developer's perspective, what are you seeing in terms of the steps involved to arrange for the relocation of the house, and how does that compare to demolishing a house?
So, thanks, Gil. So Pat can jump back in if I miss any of the steps, but typically the process from our perspective is almost identical between a complete demolition and a move. So we will apply for a demolition permit in either case. And as Pat had alluded to, we have to test, or we do test the house for asbestos, and have an initial look at the size and quality of the home ourselves. So some of the houses that we see will never be put in front of Pat or another mover just because they're in such poor condition, or they're just in, as I said, such terrible shape, or we've got a lot of trees in the way or so on. But if the house is in suitable condition, we'll put it in front of Pat and have it make a call. He'll come and assess it. But the demo permit process is the same either way. We apply for the same permitting. We still have to do the same shutoffs, ATCO, water, and max, so on. And so that's why we see a bit of a mix in our case. We move about half the houses that we demo, or that we are, rebuilding on that site in a year. So 50%.
Right. Excellent. And so as a developer, what do you see as the benefits in doing this? And basically, why do you do it?
Well, personally, I have a lean towards, recycling, not just for the benefit of this call, but I do. We pride ourselves in giving clients all of the options in front of them. I mean, never have I had a client say, no, we don't want to move the house, let's just demo it, for any other reason than perhaps a timeline challenge. But most cases, clients are very supportive when we put that as an option in front of it. And we do for every single client. Again, our restrictions would be, 1, the state of the house, and 2, of course, site restrictions, and 3, sometimes timelines. But if we're out in front of it early enough, usually clients will be very supportive of that for their own environmental reasons. They just are excited to keep that house out of the landfill and try to do something good at the initial phase of the house build process.
Well, and so what's the response that you see from owners when you've actually successfully moved a home? What's some of the feedback that you hear?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we often have homeowners getting up at 2 or 3 in the morning to videotape Pat's guys or whoever moving those houses. So that's pretty exciting for them. But no, my client base is fairly well educated in the environmental challenges we're all facing. They look for ways, for the most part, understanding, of course, that they do know that this is a carbon intensive business, but they are looking for ways to make a bit of a difference. So, the rest of my builds are talking all sorts of environmental things, solar, all that stuff. But in this case, it's an easy way for them to get started. And it is easy for us to make that call and make that suggestion on almost every home. Again, with the limitations that we do face on some of the older stock of housing in the inner city of Calgary.
Right. Yeah. Okay, we might have a chance to talk a bit about that, but the different building types and some of the challenges on that side. But I do want to focus on one of the main points that gets raised when we talk about relocating homes, and that's really the business case, the financial side of things. So, Pat, what's the average cost to move and relocate an average size home in from Calgary, I guess?
Yeah, from Calgary, we give it like about 100-kilometer radius of Calgary, and then costs may go up because of the fuel and different kind of things, but you're probably around 30,000. It's a nice even round number.
Yeah.
Plus permits, plus City of Calgary permits. And that's always a crapshoot of what those costs are until the City of Calgary kind of tells us what the costs are. So I'd say 40,000.
Okay, and then you mean like tree permits and stuff, like related permits that you need to actually move the home?
Correct, Gil. Yeah.
And Dave, what's the average cost to demo a home without taking into consideration things like hazardous material removal?
I'd say on average, we're about 15,000 to demo a home, including dump costs. You know, in fairness, there are some items that are recycled, such as concrete, but for the most part, it's about average $15,000.
Okay. So, Pat, is that 30,000 include the hookup and connection once you've got it on the foundation as well, or is that just strictly the move to get it to the new site?
That's just the move. You know, some people in rural areas, some people will put it onto a full basement, some people will put it onto a crawl space, so it's different kind of costs on that stuff. We just move it and we rely on the client to have a basement ready at the other end, and then they'll pour the basement and do the hookups. But every house that I move or I sell, the feedback we get from our clients is they're saving 50% of the cost on building a house.
Well, that was where I was going at. When you factor in now building the new home on it, what are we looking at there?
Oh God, yeah, I don't know. The prices just keep on getting higher and higher, but you know, it all depends. It's a lot about sweat equity in my line of work. The people that are willing to relocate a 30, 40, 50-year-old house for a low cost, get it onto a property, and then they'll peck away at it, maybe put new windows in or maybe put some flooring in. But that typical house, Dave can say, it might be $300 a foot compared to $50 a square foot that I'm trying to relocate a house, you know. And me and a few developers like Dave, we're willing to give houses away to clients. We are saying, here's a house for $1. You just pick up the tab to move it. And then they're getting a 1,200 square foot house for 40,000. Seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, that's excellent. And if we look at time, because time, time's a factor when often we have very short windows of opportunity to get these homes moved off a site before whatever the new build is happening. What's the difference in time to relocate a home versus building, well, first of all, demoing it, but also if we factor in the time to construct a new home. You mentioned it's about 5 days to move that home or to move a home from the existing site. What's been the experience in terms of demolition, Dave, for clearing a site?
So it would be about the same. So again, the demo permitting process is exactly the same for us. The move off the site versus a demo is about a week. So that is, very, comparable for sure. So.
Okay. And then obviously we're looking at the difference in time. Pat, I don't know if you can comment on the build side, but rehooking that house up, maybe doing some efficiency upgrades, touch-ups to it. How does that compare to building a new home from spec?
Well, let's go back to this house that I'm moving right now for these individuals, that monster.
Mm-hmm.
So they bought the house for $100,000. The move's $100,000. The basement's $100,000. And the hookups and stuff is probably on a high end $100,000. That house is going to be probably appraised on the 4 acres out in Red Deer probably for about $1 million. So they'll potentially have $500,000 into it, but once they get occupancy, it's going to be turned into $1 million.
Right.
That's a big animal. Me and my brother do flip houses. Like, we'll take our own house out of the city of Calgary from Dave, pick it up for ourselves, put it on a 1 acre parcel, fix it up, rent it or sell it. We're into a typical house, basement, landscape hookups, depending on redeveloping the basement. We usually just hook the mechanical up, but we're 200,000 all said and done. And
time-wise from start to finish, what are we looking at?
A month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Compared to a new build, which would be roughly, I mean,
that's Dave's baby, but Dave builds big houses, so.
No, I mean, let's talk apples to apples. You know, it wouldn't be a custom home. It would be, it might be depending on the quality of the home, but I'm imagining it's going to be considerably more than a month. I don't know, Dave, you want to comment on that?
Okay, so sorry, go ahead. So that house, the big one that Pat spoke about, from the start of excavation on those 4 acres to when clients can move in, 8 to 10 months to build it. And just quick calculation on costs, depending what the inside finishes are, we couldn't build that house from scratch for less than about 980,000, maybe a little bit more than that. Factor in a contingency of 10%, so you're obviously at about 1.1 million for that build. Build time, like I said, 8 to 10 months. Some of the smaller bungalows, of course, we can put something like that up in 6 months. And I don't want to digress off the main topic here, but of course we've got to find the labor, the trades for that. That's a whole nother animal for another panel discussion, I'm sure, but we're so short people that that timeline can quickly extend through just the sheer busyness of the industry and lack of qualified trades.
Right. No, that's really helpful, and yeah, I think these are a lot of factors that people may not take into consideration when they're looking at these different options, but that labor is definitely another one. I'm going to bring Glenn into the conversation now. Glenn, your company's been working on developing a new model for saving and relocating homes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so and thanks for having me, Gil. It's been super interesting to hear what Pat and David are up to, because I think it's very similar. The model is very similar, at least in terms of what they're working on, compared to what we're doing out here in Vancouver and along the coast of British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. So much like Pat and David, there's a traditional conventional model of save a home, move it, plonk it down a piece of land, sell it. And I think that sounds like what Pat's been doing a bit, and we've been working on that here in Metro Vancouver, moving homes out of urban areas like Vancouver or Coquitlam or Burnaby, and then moving them to a little bit more exurban communities. Now, one of the differences geographically is that we move 80% of homes by barge, just because our urban areas are set up differently, and to get to accessible exurban land, you really need to take a barge and get it out to like the Sunshine Coast or to one of the Gulf Islands or something like that. So traditionally, that's where a lot of these homes will go, is an island, like the Salt Spring, Galliano, if anyone has been out this way. Generally on islands, build costs are a lot higher. And so there's a competitive market advantage to take a home to an island where it's hard to get trades, it's hard to get materials and all that kind of stuff. So a repurposed home on an island that's growing makes a ton of sense from a development perspective, which is one of the things that we've been working on here at Renewal. So there is that for-profit development side of our work. I think to your point though, Gil, and I kind of, what I think is really most exciting about what we're working on right now is the potentiality of connecting developers to non-for-profit housing groups and to First Nation communities that need housing. So it sounds like there's about 500 plus homes demoed in Calgary. There's about 3,000 homes slated for demo every year here in Metro Vancouver. So like the sheer amount of demolition happening out here is just insane. So, and you know, I think what Dave is doing, working with Pat, is brilliant, and I think we need a lot more builders and demo companies, you know, reaching out to moving relocation companies like Pat's to say, hey, I got a good idea, you take this away and help repurpose it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. What I will add to the conversation that Dave and Pat were having is, I generally find that individual homeowners are much more willing to go through that process. So Dave was saying, you know, whenever he's brought this up to a homeowner, they've all been like, yeah, then demoed. And I think that the emotional connection to that home, it can't be overstated. You know, if a person lived in the home for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and had memories in the home and, you know, worked on the flooring and helped on the improvements, and they've got great memories in the home, those are the people that really don't want to see these things crunched and end up in the landfill. The challenge that we're having out here in Vancouver, and I'm not too familiar with the situation in Calgary, is that a lot of the demolition now is being driven by developers. And they're the ones gobbling up 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 50 homes, single family homes, to do higher density residential development projects. Those folks don't care about the buildings in the same way that an individual would care about their own home. They just, you know, it's an obstacle to them. They want the home gone as fast and as cheap as possible, and because they want to get along with their project, right? So those developers, we're traditionally, it's been harder to engage them on this relocation model, because, you know, it's different. It's not the easy cookie cutter thing of bringing the, you know, the machine demo process and company. So, you know, they're much more hesitant. They don't care about the homes like the way that an individual homeowner would care about them. They just want them gone, right? So one of the things that we've been really working out to answer your question, Gil, is basically saying, listen, we have a huge housing crisis here in BC. There's a huge affordable housing crisis. There's not enough housing for a lot of families and a lot of folks, especially lower income earners. And we see it a lot in coastal communities or up the coast or wherever it might be, a lot of First Nation communities. So we're saying, one of the things I've been working on is to connect developers to these groups that need housing and say, listen, you've got 5, 10, 15 homes slated for demo in the sub that you're working on.
Glenn, we just lost. We've lost you for a second. Can you go back?
Nation will turn nickel to their community. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just cut out for a bit. Can you just go back a couple of sentences? You were just talking a bit about the just starting into the model, if you could. Yeah.
So coming back, just rewinding there 10, 15 seconds. So basically what I've been working on is going and approaching big ones, medium-sized, small ones, and just being like, listen, you're going to pay, and here it's a lot more than $15,000 to crunch a bungalow. It's like, you know, $30,000 to crunch a bungalow. So you're going to pay $30,000 to demolish this 1,000 square foot home. We've assessed it. It's a good mover, the same way that Pat does. And we say, listen, instead of giving the demo company that $30,000, why don't you give that to the nation? And the nation will use that to hire the relocation company and work with us to move the 5, 10, 15 homes to their community. So that is a no-brainer to the developers because it makes no financial difference to them. Instead of paying the demo company, they're paying the nation or the nonprofit housing group. So, you know, there's a bit of political will on their end to do it, but they look good. And
I keep losing you.
It's a good mark for them. Sorry, I'm locked into my internet, so I'm not sure what's going on. But anyways, and so I guess there's an incredible potential for that model to be scaled and replicated, not only here in Metro Vancouver, but I think across Canada, wherever there's a potential for home relocation. And so that's part of what we've been working on, Gil.
That's great. So yeah, we're looking at taking the cost to the homeowner or the developer and basically giving it to the new property owner, which could be a First Nation or a social housing organization or anybody, to basically offset some of their costs. There's also, you know, in this model, this idea of a tax credit. Can you tell me a bit about that as well?
Yeah, so there's two other things that if we really wanted to dive into this, that's going to help facilitate this model. One are grants, federal grants that are available for new homes or renovated homes on reserve, or for nonprofit housing groups. And so those grant programs and the criteria. We're currently in conversations with the feds about looking at the criteria of those grants and the applicability of those grants. That's going to be another big piece, Gil, to drive down the cost for the receiving community, be it a First Nation or a nonprofit housing group. And then, so that's the second piece. The first piece is reallocation of their demo budget. The second piece is the grants that are available. And then the third piece is that homes can be donated. There's a group in the United States called the Home Donation Group. Basically what they do is they're a charity, they're a registered charity, and homes can be donated to charities. So you just get an appraised value on it, and then you coordinate the donation of the home to the charity. The charity issues a charitable tax receipt to the homeowner, whoever owns it, if it's a developer or if it's an individual. And then at the end of the year, when they file their taxes, going through the accountants, and there's a whole process that we've been working on with MNP and different accounting firms, they would pay less provincial and federal tax, just like if you donate it to the United Way or something like that, and you get a charitable tax receipt for $50 because you donated to the United Way. You can do the exact same thing with an entire home, and we've seen that play out. It's not a new model; it's a tried and tested model, but linking it up with those other two pieces that I mentioned really helps drive down the cost to the point where these First Nation communities and these nonprofit housing groups are getting homes for a quarter or a fifth of the price of what it would cost to build modular or prefab or anything else.
That's awesome. Thanks, Glenn. That's really great. When I first learned about this model, I got really excited about it and the potential for it. So looking forward to seeing that roll out more as people start to connect the dots on this. So we've got the financial case. We've got it's a proven technology. We've just seen an example of what Pat's done in terms of moving this large home. So what's standing in our way? What's the challenges that are facing us, and why aren't we seeing more homes? Why are we seeing actually fewer homes being moved in Calgary today? Pat, do you want to start us off on that?
They keep on raising the interest rates. Money is becoming scarce. Harder to borrow money in rural areas, especially if a client just has bare land or wants to go buy bare land. They can't get financing for it. Glenn, it's kind of interesting that you talked about some of the nations. We actually work quite a bit with Tsuut'ina Nation, which is just outside of Calgary. Probably in the last 10 years, we have moved 3 new homes and probably about 12 used homes to Tsuut'ina. But the money run out. There's no money. The feds won't give them any more money for housing. So their money run out. They would love to have, I just had a meeting last weekend with one of the chief's brothers. They need housing, but there's no money. They need housing, and same thing, you know what I mean? It's money. It's quite a bit to do with money, you know what I mean? A lot of people can't afford, in my line of work, compared to how Dave is getting his clients. It's a different ball game. A lot of people can't afford the $1 million homes, so they come to me with a budget, and I have to really work with that budget and make the pieces go together. Money, yeah. Counties are. Go ahead, sorry.
Even with the reduced cost of these homes relative to a new home, it's still under the current, interest rate, the financial conditions. It's challenging for a lot of nations and individuals to make it work for themselves. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, and Glenn, I don't know if it's the same on the island, but the counties around Calgary are changing their specifications on these used homes coming in to rural areas. 15 years ago, we could pretty much move any house out to the county, put it on a basement, and a new family move in. Now they're having to, get them to put bonds up. They have to restucco it. They have to put newer windows in it. They have to, and that's starting to drive up the cost too. So it's kind of, the further we go away from Calgary, the less the rules are, and it's easier and more affordable. I don't know if that's the same with you and Nickel Brothers, Glenn, out there.
So there's a couple points there that you hit, Pat, but I grant right now with, it's called Indigenous Services Canada.
Yeah.
And the grants are there. Really the question is the applicability of the grants to, relocating and modernizing these homes. There are lots of good examples where First Nation communities were able to get these grants for this model. So we think that there's precedent, but it's something that I'm actually currently like in the process of having those conversations with the federal government about. So that's number one. Number two is I think pulling in the demo money, which here in BC, it's like, especially in Metro Vancouver, it's like 30,000 at the base level. I think that definitely helps lower the cost, especially if we're doing this on a nonprofit or for First Nation communities or nonprofit housing groups. So that's number two. And to answer your question, Gil, like I definitely think there's a really important conversation around policy at the municipal level to really create the right incentives so that homeowners and developers are encouraged and enabled to look at relocation first and not demolition first. And I think, the Blueprint for Change outlines a lot of that conversation, Gil, but I definitely, and that's an active conversation that we're having with different municipalities right now. Like I'm going to a municipal council meeting tonight to talk about what they can do as a municipality to put in the right incentives, things like demolition salvage deposits. So like the City of Vancouver, the City of District of North Vancouver, you can't apply for a demo permit without putting down a $15,000 bond. Anybody, like any developer, any homeowner, and then you get that $15,000 back if you salvage, I think it's like 80 or 90% of the home, and relocation counts. So those are the kind of tools and incentives municipalities have, and they're putting them in place right now to create the right incentives. So I think all of this starts working together, but it requires some leadership on a lot of different fronts, but especially I think there's a really important role from local municipal governments to sit down and to look through all the different enabling policies.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn and Pat. Did you have anything to add on the challenges there, Dave?
I'll add and then counter one of the comments a little bit. So some of the homes that are being demolished in the city are being demolished for affordable housing. And I'm not going to sit here and say that that's what I build, because it's not. But I would add that we don't want to shift the costs of this to those projects. I mean, certainly my client base, it's a different conversation and certainly one I would entertain, but even around my own house, there's affordable housing being built. Those houses that come off those sites can be moved or might not be, but if you put bonds in or things like that, you are just going to drive up the cost of that affordable housing. So that's one counterpoint. But city restrictions, utilities, I mean, permitting, your street permitting is a big one for us. Pat can attest to this. It's not unheard of for us to have a $30,000 or $40,000 cost put on a tree in front of the house. So if that tree is there and it's going to cost $40,000 to cut it down, the house cannot be moved. So that is actually the single biggest challenge we have. Is literally some trees that somebody innocently planted in the 40s or 50s out front of the house, or maybe the 60s. And I'm the last one to advocate for cutting that tree down, but that is the difference between some of our houses being moved and some of them not. And so an elm tree, spruce tree, some of them are gorgeous, some of them are probably at the end of their life cycle anyway, but they're assigned very high values, and we cannot cut them down without paying that cost to the city. So I had one last year, it was $48,000 for a tree out front of the house. No problem, that's fine, it's a gorgeous tree. Last thing I want to do is cut it down, but that house was demolished because of that. So I don't know if you want to take that one up, Pat, but I'm sure you've run into that.
I've got, yeah, it's kind of fun. Well, with the development permits and the building permits on your end, it seems like it's harder to work around a tree. I believe since the new mayor got in and since urban forestry has stepped in, they are not allowing any trees to get cut. I have a house right now that my builder got the DP approved, got the BP approved, phoned me. I bought the house. We were getting ready to move the house. Urban forestry said, you can't move the house. We're not allowing the tree to be cut. The tree was 30,000, which was fine. I was going to split the cost and save the house. They still denied the move. House got demolished. And so that money, a lot of people have to be educated. That money that we pay for those trees, Dave, it just doesn't go into the city of Calgary's pocket. It goes back into planting trees throughout Calgary and revitalizing older trees and stuff. So it's pretty frustrating that there's a lot of houses being demolished, good used homes, taking away a lot of my work as well. And I don't know, maybe 5 years I might sell the company because might not be able to move any houses in Calgary the way it's going.
Yeah.
Permit cost has rose 500% in 4 years on my end, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, these are definitely some challenges that not just happening in Calgary, but in other cities. We're definitely seeing. I want to apologize. My system cut out for a second, but I am back. Before we can spend a little more time on this, and I want to talk a bit about some solutions, ways forward with this. But before we do, I just want to check, Brittany, do we have any questions from the audience at this point?
Yeah, we do have a few questions, so we definitely want to save a bit of time to try to get to a couple of those.
Why don't we do that first, and then we'll save a few minutes to talk about solutions at the end, okay?
So is there any programming to help try to connect people with older homes to be moved with other people that want to purchase them?
Not to my knowledge, no program.
So I can jump in. I would say no from my side either program wise, but definitely working with people like Pat is how our clients' homes are connected with an end user. So it's private.
Right. When I know that
That's a very good question. There is no programs. Wish there was. Yeah, that's a good question, actually, Brittany.
When I know you're working on a model to link buyers and sellers of homes, do you have any comment on that?
So there's two parts to that question. The first part, and I'm actually kind of interested, Pat, how do you connect through Dave, but once you get a home, how do you connect it to someone who wants to receive that home to pay for the move?
Just because we've been around since 1970, and just people know to come to us to move a house. People know to come to us for us to sell them a home. We really don't spend money in advertising. We just really rely on people coming to me, and then we go search. Right. Website, social media.
So I just want to clarify something, Pat. If I went to your website, could I see all the homes that are coming up available?
100%.
Okay. So I guess
past moves, yeah.
Right. So I guess that's to the question that they're asking is how does the public find these homes? They can come to your website and they can see the homes that you've got lined up to be moved, kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of the model that's being used out here with, for example, if you go to the website, it sounds like you can see and find the homes that they've identified as movable and they're looking for someone to receive. The second part of that question is the grants available for energy retrofits. I don't know what it looks like in Alberta, but I know that there's some pretty good provincial and federal grants to do things like window upgrades, blowing in insulation, heat pump, all that kind of stuff. So I guess that might answer the second part of that question.
Thanks. Yeah, the federal one is the Greener Homes program that's available right now. So definitely check that out if you're looking for some energy efficiency upgrades. And then For the second question, I think this will be directed at Dave, but feel free to jump in. Wouldn't the proposed requirement for the analysis of relocation or material reuse negatively impact housing affordability and densification due to the additional cost and regulatory delays? Has this effect been considered, or is there anything that we could do to mitigate that?
Well, so firstly, I guess to be clear, I'm and don't pretend to be. We build custom houses. They're not fitting into the affordability model of this as my clients are building. But as I spoke before, yes, I do think that the side effects of some of the things that have been discussed today do have to be considered when looking at affordable housing locations, because they will drive up the cost of building that affordable house, the end product. So that has to be balanced with grants from, you know, local and municipal authorities. But in terms of overall cost percentage on projects like mine, it's fairly small, and my clients would be relatively supportive of that, again, pending all the other things. So as Pat and I were talking about back and forth, like a tree, for example, being in the way, that cost of 30,000 in the case of his tree, and I have had the same thing happen where the city has come in and said, no, you can't cut that tree under any circumstances. Again, not advocating for cutting down all the trees in front of our houses. However, that cost of the 30,000 on top of still having to demo the house or move the house would add, that's a significant percentage. So for an average project of mine, that will drive up the cost 3 to 5% at least. And then on affordable housing, as a percentage of each door built, it would be significant. I can't present that math right now, but yeah. If anybody else wants to help me out here.
Yeah, Dave, you know, I tried to save this one house with this tree. I tried to explain to urban forestry, to the alderman, it takes roughly 45 trees to build a 1,200 square foot house.
Yeah.
So we're trying to save one tree, ignoring the fact that there's 45 healthy trees into that one structure. I'm not the most smartest guy in this world, but something doesn't make sense, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both.
Brittany,
and
if we can just do one or two more maybe and try to keep the answers tight, just given the time that we have left, that'd be great.
yeah, agreed. Pat, this will be directed to you first. In some neighborhoods, there are many infills coming in. So are there ways that the materials could be removed or reused from a house slated for demolition? And if so, kind of what the process is to get these materials reused, or who to contact, or what kind of options are out there?
I think that would probably be more directed to Dave. If I looked at a house and I can't move it, it's too old. I'll just walk away and tell Dave, I can't, it's impossible to move the house. Then I guess it would be Dave's judgment to try to sell some of those materials or just not.
Every house that we do fully demo, the concrete's recycled. Most of the metal, so copper or steel that's pulled out of the house, is recycled. So in fairness, that is all automatically done. There's several reclamation companies in town that will go in and pull out, you know, windows that are salvageable, flooring and things like that. So that is our standard process now. Lumber itself can't be pulled apart and just reused. So a 2x4, 2x6, those are, you know, that is 10 times the price per 2x4 than it would be to buy new. So, and obviously lots of times in very poor condition. So keep the answer tight. There you go.
And that's great. This is exactly the subject of the next webinar that we're going to be hosting in September around deconstruction. So great segue to that. Maybe one more, Brittany?
Yeah, we have one more. We'll have to kind of keep it tight too, but how do you finance a move? Can you get a construction mortgage loan? How would that work? Maybe I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, line of credits, I guess, people will just come to us with already financing put into place. I don't finance. I help the budget with that part. They come to us with financing. So that part I don't know.
They can get, depending how much equities, sorry, just to jump in, depending how much equity they have in the land or whatever, they can get a line of credit for the move.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting, the whole that financing side is a topic worthy of a webinar, I'm sure. Okay, 30 seconds each. What would you want to see as the number one solution to help increase the amount of home moving? We've heard a number of the challenges, but for you, what would be the number one thing for you right now if we could focus on some policy changes in this area? I'll start with Pat and Dave and then Glenn.
City Calgary could help with some of the costs on the permits to deflect the cost of moving a house. A lot of houses will get demolished because the permit costs have gone up significantly. We could work in a partnership with the City of Calgary to save some of these homes. Yeah, and just more education, I guess, on people on the outside world to know that we can salvage homes and stuff.
Awesome.
My side would be simply, as Pat alluded to, permitting, but also some of the ancillary stuff. Trees we've spoken at length about. Again, not advocating for cutting them all down, but just being a consideration.
And Glenn?
Yeah, and I just want to highlight before I jump off here that I'm glad that we had this conversation, and I think even having this conversation helps to further the awareness around this industry and around this model. And Pat, I'd love to sit down sometime if we ever cross paths to exchange notes, because I feel like there's a lot of overlap. I'd say that there's a package of policy incentives that municipal governments can and should be enacting to enable this model. And I meant to come back to Dave's point, I think most of it's incentives, and it should actually help builders and developers speed up their timelines by decoupling the demo permit or the relocation permit from their build permit. Give them bonus density if it's a developer, give them extra density if they commit to relocating a building or deconstructing a building. And I think that if municipalities really lean into this, I think we can work together to solve this waste problem. And I do think that we're moving in that direction. At least I feel like we're moving in that direction. So it's just about putting our heads together and building the right will and to get some of these things going.
Great. That's a great point to lead things off on. So just because we're near the end of the hour here, I want to thank all three of you, Glenn, Pat, Dave, for your time and your experience and sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate you giving your valuable time to us and to the City of Calgary, and specifically to Nalini Mohan and Brittany Tran, who you met, for helping put on this webinar series on the circularity in the built environment. We hope that this is the start of an ongoing conversation about incorporating more circular practices into how we treat homes. I think there's a strong business and environmental case for doing this, as you've heard today. So thank you all for joining us today. Just want to ask you to please take a moment to fill out a feedback survey that you're going to get. And a reminder that part 2 of this series on deconstruction is going to take place on September 21st, and then a final webinar on embodied carbon on October 25th. You can register for both of those in the same place that you registered for this webinar on the City of Calgary's website. And feel free to reach out to us at Lighthouse with any questions or suggestions that you have about advancing circularity in the built environment. So thank you again to the panel and to everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Thank you.